Good evening, everybody. Welcome at WU on a very hot and on a very not so easy evening or afternoon just before a public holiday. I know this is difficult, but it seems as if the topic is hot enough to stay here in this very cool room today. So I'm really glad to have you all here. And to me, it's a very special pleasure to officially open this public lecture. I don't know how many of you have been to one of these public lectures before, but for those who have not, I just want to introduce a little bit the idea of these public lectures. It's a series, and it's called WU Matters, WU Talks, and it's a series that stretches throughout the whole year, the whole study year, so it ends pretty soon, and it starts again in fall. And what we're doing is we're inviting researchers, and we are inviting guest speakers from outside the WU to contribute to topics of general interest. It is meant as a forum, WU Matters, WU Talks is meant as a forum with lively discussions with panelists who are presenting topics that are relevant for our society today. And it's not only for experts, and I'm glad that many students, or many of you are students, so they are most probably not experts, but they share a common interest, namely the interest in hearing people talk in an educated way and exchanging ideas about a topic that is quite interesting. I think the topic that we have here today is a very timely one. It's the nexus of political climate and economic necessities in the world where international trade is at stake. With this very brief introduction, again, welcome at WU, and I want to hand over to Nikolaus Jilch, who will immediately present you the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Lichtenberg. You would take away all my weather jokes for the day. So. It's hot outside, we know, let's stay inside and enjoy the evening. We're talking about Trump, we're talking about globalization, about trade, about the question, will there be more protectionism, will there be trade wars, are we already seeing trade wars, and of course, is Trump going to stay in office until 2024, if my math is correct? We have two speakers today. One is originally from Germany, lives in Austria. One is originally from Alaska and lives in Austria. So we get two very special perspectives today on this topic. Also, one is from the Foreign Service. One is an economist concentrating on companies. The format is pretty simple. We'll hear two lectures, two keynotes by Professor Nell and Mr. Wenig, and then afterwards we'll sit down for a quick talk. I encourage everybody to already, write down or remember your questions. We want as many questions from the audience as humanly possible. We want this to be as interactive as possible. Of course, I will also come up with some questions, but I'm always glad if the panelists can talk to the audience directly, and I think this is the perfect venue for this. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Professor Philipp Nell. He's a professor of international business here at Wirtschaftsuniversität Wien, a chair professor at the International Business at the WU, head of the WU Competence Center for Emerging Markets and CEE. So emerging markets are also pretty hit hard by what Trump is doing. Philipp Nell has studied international economics and business administration in Germany, France, and Italy. He received his doctorate from the WU. Before joining academia, he gained considerable industry experience as a strategy consultant with Roland Berger, working with firms like Mondi, Henkel, Oracle, Raiffeisen Bank International, just to name a few. He is widely experienced both in degree and executive education, and his teaching has received multiple awards. Just to name one, the CEMS Course of the Year Award in 2015 and 16. His research interests are centered on the organization of the multinational corporation, the management of subsidiaries, and the strategic role headquarters play in large and complex organizations. So without further ado, please a warm welcome for Professor Nell.
Good. Welcome also from my side. Thanks a lot for the nice welcoming words. I would like to start, my topic will be Trump and trade wars, the end of globalization. I will specifically talk about this from a perspective of global strategic management, because actually I'm not an economist, but I'm a business scholar. So let's look at this. I need to switch it on. My first point will be, here we go. My first point is, when I talk about global strategy, the most important thing in global strategy is that we talk, as a key concept, we talk about distances, or you could also say we talk about differences across countries, and how this impacts business activity. And usually we're looking at 4 different types of businesses. There are other types of typologies, but this is one of the most frequent ones that we can use. So for example, you see this here on the screen, we look at cultural differences across countries, we look at administrative distances, things, for example, like differences in the legal system or the monetary union or so. Then we talk about geographic distances. This is straightforward, you all know what that is. And we talk also about economic distances or economic differences across countries. For example, different types of labor costs across countries, or resource quality or resource availability across countries, and how this differs. So these are distances or differences, as I said, across countries. And this is one of our key concepts in global strategy, because these distances, well, actually, have they disappeared over the past? What do you think? Well, the narrative, perhaps, in the last 20, 30 years was that globalization has led to a situation where these distances or these differences have become less important, or they have disappeared. So nowadays we can quickly take a flight, it's very cheap, we can get everywhere within a short period of time. Maybe culturally the world has become a more homogeneous place. Maybe in terms of political systems, we are seeing that, or we were seeing in the past that, for example, the EU was growing together. We have one common body with regards to the monetary situation, and so on and so forth. So in the past, globalization was usually associated with distances don't matter anymore. The death of distance was also said sometimes. But is this true? Let me give you one picture. This is the world map. Yeah, it looks a bit strange. I will explain this in a second. This is the world map, and this is Austria in the middle here with the dark red color. And these are all the imports of Austria, and the map has been adapted in such a way so that the countries where a lot of imports come from, they have been enlarged in terms of size, and those countries where we do not import from, they are shrinking on this map. So what do we see here? What we see very clearly is that distance does matter a lot. Actually, if you look at the US over there on this side, this is a tiny little country when it comes to how important the US is for imports towards Austria. If you compare this, for example, to countries like Switzerland or Slovakia, Czech Republic, well, they are more important than the US. India, as a whole subcontinent over here, you can barely recognize it because it's so unimportant. Okay? So distance, in that sense, matters a lot. All of this important activity is centered here around Europe, where we have geographic closeness, we are culturally relatively close, we have a monetary union for a lot of these places, and so on and so forth. A very similar picture, not for imports, but now a picture for foreign direct investments. So the places where Austrian firms would invest into, very similar picture. Again, the US, relatively speaking, doesn't matter much. Actually, what we see on this map is that countries close by, especially also here in Southern Eastern Europe and so on, the Balkan countries, much more important than the US. So distance does matter. And this is the key thing from a global strategy perspective. And therefore, I skipped this for the second, therefore, when we talked about globalization in the past, we usually said, yes, this is the overall process. It has developed towards more global integration. But in terms of how far we got, we do not talk about globalization in our field. We actually most of the time say we are in a status of semi-globalization. because the US and India and stuff is not really on the map for Austria. And actually these maps, they look very similar if we look at this from other countries' perspectives. Yeah? So we usually talk about semi-globalization, and in global strategy we deal with semi-globalization. We say this has implications for the strategy of firms. For example, when firms try to answer two different types of questions. A, where should we compete? So where should we, in which countries should we be active in? Obviously not that much in the US, not that much in India, much more in Slovakia, much more in Eastern Europe. And how do we compete there? When we go abroad, when we want to operate abroad, how do we compete in these different types of markets? And there's three very simple strategies that I would like to quickly outline to you. I will come back to this then later on. The first strategy is aggregation. So in case we do, or firms do perceive no distances, no differences, actually rather similarities across countries, for example, in terms of consumption patterns, well, then we can aggregate, or in other words, we can standardize our product, one Big Mac around the world. Or if we think there is a lot of differences across the countries, maybe we can profit from the differences across the countries. This is an arbitrage strategy. So for example, labor costs here are high, labor costs in Slovakia are low. Why don't we go with our manufacturing to Slovakia? Because then we can profit of the labor cost differences. This is an arbitrage strategy. Or finally, an adaptation strategy. This is straightforward, right? It basically means, well, we need to adapt our products, the way how we work, our business models to all the different locations, to all the different countries in which we're active in. So this is everything what I've just talked about. This is the past. This is all what we know. Of course, the interesting question, this is the main topic of tonight, the interesting question is, how will it develop in the future? Because we've seen a long stretch of increasing globalization, you could say, in the past, maybe since 1945. But how will it develop into the future? I have no idea. Mr. Winnick has a bit more ideas. We will hear about this soon. But I would like to ask you to give me your opinion. And for that, I've prepared this little survey tool now. I would like you to take out your mobile phones, if you have your mobile phones with you. I'm pretty sure that 90+% for you, this is true. Take out your mobile phones, go into the internet, and go to the website which is called shakespeak.me. Shakespeak.me is the website. Where's your mobile phone? Yes, very good. It's a problem of sitting in the front row. So shakespeak.me, and then there's a login, which is WU 2019. Okay, very quickly, hands up, who's not there yet? Okay, we wait another 30 seconds. Login is WU 2019. And once you're done, I will move forward and you will get a question and you can choose. So let me explain to you what we're doing right now. I will give you actually three long-term scenarios. And you can choose which one you think is the most likely one to occur. So what are the three different options? Option number one, very clear and very straightforward, deglobalization. So it's kind of the counter movement towards what we had the last 40, 50 years. Deglobalization, which would mean, for example, we have a hard Brexit, we have Trump being re-elected, we have kind of all the globalization losers, if you want to say so, are gaining political power and pushing their agenda. We might have additional issues such as migration and tensions in terms of nationalism, so on. I think we have seen some of this already in the past few elections in a couple of countries here in Europe, for example. And of course, very, very importantly, and Trump is a clear example for this, we would have a loss of importance, you could say, of large institutions, global institutions, such as the World Trade Organizations. Yeah? Trump's policies of America first is clearly something about, I don't care about the rest, it's America is the only thing that interests me. So World Trade Organization, I don't care about those rules, and this might be the picture here. So this is scenario number one. All the way on the right side, scenario C is the opposite. Here we have globalization, where maybe Brexit is not so impactful, Trump goes away relatively quickly, or there's some counterpowers, and we maintain the international institutions to a large extent. Maybe they look a bit different in the future, so maybe the World Trade Organization is not anymore this kind of Western-dominated system. Maybe it becomes a Chinese type of World Trade Organization, but still it's a multinational or a global body that organizes international trade and international capital flows, for example. So this would look, when this is just a short stint of problems, and then we go back towards our normal globalization the way we've experienced it in the last 50 years. Or the third scenario in the middle here is what I call ping pong world. I'm not sure if this is the best word for it, but here the idea is that we say, well, it will become increasingly uncertain what we have. Maybe we fumble around a bit. Sometimes we move a bit towards deglobalization, sometimes towards globalization. Maybe we still maintain a good and strong EU, but maybe without the UK, so it's becoming a bit smaller. We talk maybe about minilateralism, that's the term here, instead of multilateralism, and this is the question. Good. So now you can choose. Which one do you think is the most likely one in the future? As I said, whatever you think, I have no idea what the future will bring. I can see the votes already kicking in. Very good. We are at 45 now. 55. 60. Very good. Excellent. 76 responses, thanks a lot. Let's directly look at the results. So here we go. This is the picture that we have. So we have currently approximately 12% of you think it's the Trump way, the deglobalization. 56% high level of uncertainty, ping pong world. 33, so 1/3 of you think, it will go back, and we will have, after this short period of problems, maybe we'll go back towards a classic movement towards more globalization. Okay, very interesting. I'm not so sure what I would have voted for, but let me show you what a previous group, a previous audience has said. Actually, I've asked exactly this question already pretty exactly 2 years ago. In a much larger audience, and you see here the results. This is from May 2017, 2 years ago, and as you can see also here, the ping pong world is the most important scenario, so the scenario that you think is the most likely one was also in this second group 2 years ago. Sorry? Oh yeah, true, it's very, very close, but you're right, the globalization was a bit higher, but ping pong world is nearly equally high. At 46%, deglobalization at 7%. So if we compare this to our results here, first what we observe is much more, well, not much more, but 4 or 5 percentage points more people that think that deglobalization will kick in. Ping pong world pretty much increased, right? So up to 10 percentage points, I think, much more uncertainty. And globalization, if you think about this here, 33%, and 2 years ago, 47% is a large decrease. So what it seems like that, in the beginning of the Trump period, where also Brexit was still a bit more uncertain probably at that time, still a lot of you were very confident with regards to how globalization will develop in the future. And nowadays, apparently, you have become much more negative if we, for the moment, define globalization as positive. Okay. Good. Well, thank you very much. As I said, I would be very close to this regarding, I'm probably rather up here, deglobalization ping pong world. And if this kicks in, let me end my talk with a couple of theses, hypotheses, you could say, of what will happen in the future. Thesis number one, I actually think that all of all these distances that I was just talking about, the most important change comes on this administrative political side. Yeah? So geographic distance or economic distance for the moment, I mean, maybe not that much influenced, but it's the political administrative distance which is very important. Second, if distances increase again a bit, then we will see more adaptation strategies as compared to aggregation strategies, for example. And adaptation strategies means, you know, much less focus on globally integrated supply chains, you know, whereas, for example, you know, one input product and another input product from two different countries are moved to a second country, they're assembled, and is moved yet to another country, is assembled with something else, and then finally only exported. So multiple steps in the value chains where the products or input products cross borders. We will see less of this. We will also see, I think, more foreign direct investment in selected countries. For example, if there's lots of pressure in the US, then firms will say, okay, what about I invest completely, you know, into the US and I'll build up my own manufacturing site there, and then Trump is happy. We will see exits from some countries, selected countries, because if there's more distances and more costs of doing international business, then maybe going international doesn't make sense anymore in the first place. So I think we will see sometimes here and there firms staying rather at home. And finally, I also think organizationally, we will see an increase in the role of the country manager as compared to other types of managers. Thesis number three, we will see aggregation strategies still happening, but on a smaller level. Yeah? So for example, only the core of the EU, maybe only Germany, France, maybe EU without UK and so on, so less aggregated than before. Finally, since most of the trends, or you could say most of the political agenda by Trump or by Brexit or by some similar movements in other countries are driven by those people that seem to have problems with or seem to have been disadvantaged by globalization, I think that firms also need to think about this and need to think how they can respond to this and how they can be active in this regard, right? So I think that, you know, firms are required to be more active in terms of political and in terms of social efforts. For example, trying to talk, trying to discuss with regards to how those that suffer from globalization, how those could be helped. And finally, my last hypothesis is that we will see in the future, we will see much more contingency planning or risk management, you could say, by firms, because as you also now indicated, we will have much more uncertainty. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Nell. Our second speaker is Mark Wenig. I'm trying to pronounce it English, but it's a German word, so I'm having a hard time. He's a recently retired Foreign Service Officer with the United States Department of State. He and his wife now live in Vienna, but before he's been all around the world. He has been served his last assignment as a U.S. cultural attaché in Cairo, Egypt. He has been working in Warsaw, Poland, in Cambodia, New Zealand, Leipzig, Germany, Bucharest, Romania, just to name a few. He also speaks, I think, 4 languages, if I'm correct, or at least 3 fluent, and learned Romanian and Polish in preparation for his jobs. And his U.S. residence is Alaska, Anchorage, Alaska, where he's originally from. Without further ado, Mr. Wenig, please, I'll give you the stage. Warm welcome, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jilch. Actually, from my German, I describe myself as a Möchtegern. I'm a Möchtegern Deutschsprechler. Well, I do miss Alaska on days like this, I have to tell you. Never gets above 25 in the summer. And people say, isn't it cold in Alaska? And I say, only in winter. I'd like to speak today, I only have a few minutes, about the election. I don't have a PowerPoint. If I did, I would only show pictures of Donald Trump, and I don't think you all want to see that. or the other candidates. I have to give a disclaimer. I'm not a Trump supporter, but I'm going to attempt to do an analysis of where things are now in terms of domestic policy, trade issues, and analyze the chances of President Trump's re-election, and a brief overview of the administration's foreign policy and hotspots. And I think it's important that I do a disclaimer. I went to an event last evening at the America House, and I was convinced this guy was a Republican, even though he didn't say it. And I could just tell certain things. So you'll be able to tell certain things. And I promised my wife that I wouldn't get angry. She thinks I get too angry when I talk about politics. So I'll try not to get angry. I just returned from the United States. I was in Washington. I was in Anchorage, Alaska. It's all very fresh on my mind. Very different places, especially politically. Voting Democratic in Alaska, I always compare to spitting into the wind. It doesn't matter what's going to happen, but I still do it. So the 2018 midterm elections, everybody knows the Democrats retook the House and the Republicans hold the Senate, which is favoring less populous states. And when you hear all these Democrats who are talking about, all these crazy left-wing policies that they want to do, forget it, because if you don't have the Senate, you're not going to get anything passed. And we might have more gridlock. So, and the experts never mentioned this. The traditional differences between Democrats and Republicans, I think people might know this, maybe you don't. Democrats believe in government. We believe in the goodness of government. Republicans believe traditionally in smaller government, less government. Now in Alaska, everybody thinks that the government is a bad thing, but the government does everything. And so it's just this feeling of independence. We don't like government. Now, Trump's election was in 2016, and the Electoral College gave him the victory, even though Hillary got 3 million more votes. And if you take a look at some of the other states, it can go as high as 7 million. And in Wisconsin, Trump won by 10,000 votes. It's nothing. Michigan, 25,000 votes. Why do we have the Electoral College? People ask all the time. Now, our Constitution was written in 1787. How relevant can that be today, I wonder? I ask myself this. If we didn't have the Electoral College, then the candidates could just go to certain states. Everybody would go to California, they'd go to New York and just run up your totals. Republican would go to Texas, run up the totals. Unfortunately, now it has boomeranged. And what we see now is that it all comes down to a few states. Okay, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, maybe Florida, although I'm not convinced. I always say any Democrat that needs Florida, like Al Gore did, you're in trouble. You are in big trouble. Al Gore couldn't win his own state. He lost his own state of Tennessee. Now, the big question I always get, can Donald Trump win again? Will he be reelected? I'll let you draw your own conclusions, but I'll give you my take on, on his chances at the end. And I really think that it's a lot of guessing on everybody's part. These polls are ridiculous. That's why I don't want to even talk about polls. We're still a year and a half from the election. Anything can happen. But remember this. The U.S. is strongly divided politically, geographically, which affects the politics, and socially. These factors all affect what's going on now politically. Recently released Mueller report has some Democrats calling for impeachment. The White House is blocking the testimonies of people like former White House Chief Counsel Don McGahn. What the Democrats want to do, they know people don't read, right? Nobody's going to read the Mueller report, so they want to dramatize the Mueller report by bringing these people in, putting them in front of the cameras, and making the case. Now, impeachment hearings are only the first step in what impeachment is, and the Senate would have to convict. And as Donald Trump often said, he could go in Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody, and he wouldn't lose any voters. If he went on Fifth Avenue and shot somebody, he wouldn't lose the Senate. So there's no way that Donald Trump is going to be removed. And in fact, some people think that if he was impeached, you would make a victim of him. You would make him a hero. You would make him a martyr. So I'm kind of on the fence about whether I don't really want impeachment yet. It's a political decision, and the Democratic leadership has to decide if they want to go ahead. Meanwhile, they can't get the testimonies because the White House is blocking the testimonies. Now, I think what's kind of the most interesting part of my talk is, who are the Trump voters? Who are they? And I got a real education in this in my recent visit to the United States. First, you have the one-issue voters. Now, I had lunch in Washington with a former student colleague of mine, I guess you call him a fellow student, at Notre Dame, which is a Catholic university, and his only issue was abortion. He wants abortion to be illegal in the United States. They want to turn the abortion law out, Roe versus Wade. And I kept telling him, I don't want to get into a big debate about abortion. That didn't stop him. I kept getting emails and more emails, and that's his issue, okay? That's his issue. I have a 92-year-old uncle. His issue is lower taxes and the stock market. He doesn't care about the rest of the stuff. And so, in a way, Trump has delivered. He has delivered to those folks, okay? We got conservative judges, okay? We have Kavanaugh in the Supreme Court, Gorsuch in the Supreme Court. He's delivered, okay? He's delivered on lower taxes. His tax plan really benefited the wealthy people like my 92-year-old uncle. My wife always says, why does he care about money? He's not going to live much longer. But he does, and he wants low taxes, and he thinks Democrats always raise taxes. Then you get the voters who felt neglected by both parties. They're the people out in the heartland. You know, nobody ever comes to see us in Indiana or Michigan. Nobody cares about us, you know. And, okay, I get that. I get that the elites don't care about these people, but what has Trump given them? What does he do for them? And this is what I can't get through my head. And I especially can't get through my head. Some of you may remember the boxer Muhammad Ali. Remember Muhammad Ali? He used to say, I am the greatest. I am the greatest. Americans loved him, right? But Americans don't usually like people who brag. We're not a bragging country. And yet Trump is the biggest braggart I've ever seen. He just tells you how he's the biggest, the best in history. He uses superlatives all the time. And these people seem to love it. And he has 90% support among Republicans. It's amazing. It's amazing. And then you get the people who are just entertained by him. They feel he's very strong. He's a strong leader. You know, he had his kickoff last night in Orlando, Florida. Everybody's wearing the hats. And, you know, these things remind me a little bit of Nazi rallies. I hate to bring up the Nazis. Nobody wants to bring them up. But, you know, really, the feeling, and you don't see people of color at these things, very few. And if they get a person of color, they put him behind Trump. They'd be like a prop, you know. Now, Trump's poll numbers, overall ratings are between 39 and 42%, again, strongest among declared Republicans. And when you think of it, it's mind-boggling that he has those numbers. And only one Republican in Congress has opposed him in Michigan. This guy, Amash, I think his name is. A lot of the other guys, they didn't even want to contest. Corker from Tennessee, Flake from Arizona, they just quit. Some people quit the party. The speaker last night that I heard said 15% of the Republicans quit the party, but then 15% of Democrats went over to the other side. Don't you believe it? They went over to the other side in one election, not continually. Now you have the Democrats in the race. Who's running in the race? You have Joe Biden, former vice president. Trump has called him Sleepy Joe. I hate when Trump gives people nicknames. This is schoolyard stuff. Unbelievable. How can people believe that? And you have Joe Biden, who is running ahead in the polls. We're a year ahead. These polls are meaningless, totally meaningless. Biden is good. He's known. Everybody knows him, so he's ahead in the polls. Then you have Elizabeth Warren, who is going up in the polls now. She is also got a lot of these plans. She'll never get them through the Senate unless the Senate goes Democratic, which isn't likely. I'll tell you one thing. In Alaska, we're not going to have a Democratic senator. Forget it. And then you got Bernie Sanders, who's a Democratic socialist. That's a dirty word. Medicare for all. Oh, by the way, I have to tell you, when I was having lunch with this abortion guy, we were talking about Medicare, medical care for people. And he said to me, where in the Constitution, which was written in 1787, where in the Constitution does it say that we have to provide medical care for people? That's what he said. Can you believe this? He said that. I didn't have an answer. I didn't have an answer. But, you know, you talk about socialism, you talk about all this stuff, it makes Americans very uneasy. Then you have Kamala Harris, a black woman from California, brilliant woman. You have Pete Buttigieg, who, the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, where I went to university. He's gay. Will that hurt him in the general election? Probably. And then you have Cory Booker, and it was amazing. Cory Booker is a African-American male senator from New Jersey. And the fellow last night thought that he had a really good chance. I couldn't believe it. Because Cory Booker, I'm sorry, but he suffers from what I call, and I'm not a racist guy at all. In fact, I supported Obama very strongly. But he suffers from the angry black man syndrome. Now, the angry black man syndrome, the Republicans tried to get Obama angry for 8 years. They couldn't do it because he wouldn't get angry. Americans are very uneasy with angry black men. They don't like that, okay? And they're almost as uneasy with angry women, of which Elizabeth Warren is one. And they're not very happy with angry old men either, like Bernie Sanders, okay? So my wife always says, why is everybody so angry all the time? My wife doesn't get angry much. So this is the thing. And Cory Booker, in my opinion, he's not going anywhere. He's a brilliant guy. But the angry black man syndrome is going to bring him down. Then we've got a host of all these other candidates. I'm not going to even go into them. We've got some governors, Hickenlooper, Inslee, Bullock of Montana. We've got all these, we've got veterans, okay? We've got a lot of people running. The first head-on debate's going to be next week, 10 and 10. 20 people over 2 nights. Starts at 3 in the morning local time in Vienna. I'm going to be in Germany next week. I'm not even going to watch it. I'll watch the highlights. What's going to happen next year? We have the primaries. They start in February. First one's in Iowa. Iowa, very representative state. 4% of people of color. Very representative state. New Hampshire, typical Republican state, a little bit more representative. South Carolina, where most of the Democrats are African American. And again, those people running for president have to get a start in those states. If you don't get some traction in those states, you're finished. Now let me touch briefly on the tariffs, because that was mentioned. Now the Chinese have struck back on their own tariffs. I was reading an article on email earlier today that the Chinese really don't have any weapons against us. I'll tell you this. From what I know about the Chinese, you don't want to make them lose face. Trump has made them lose face, okay? He has made them lose face. He has bullied them. And if they're smart, they're not going to be bullied. They're going to hang in there and say, well, if we just hang in, maybe next year, maybe there'll be a new president. So they're not going to give him a win, in my opinion. Now, I might be wrong. Anything's possible. But when you cause the Chinese to lose face, it's not a good thing. And Trump is also using tariffs as a negotiating tool and to force countries to act in ways that he'd like them to. We saw this with Mexico and the ultimatum he gave them. I personally think it's very bad politics to bully your neighbors. Not a good idea. And now we have Iran with the cancellation of the nuclear deal, and he wonders why the Iranians are angry. And now Pompeo is saying that if one American life is lost, we're going to be retaliating. So who knows what's going to happen with that. And then we have health care, cost of higher education, immigration policy, gun control. All these are other issues that may come up. But the big issue is the economy. And the question is, what's going to happen with the economy? Now, I have read a lot and I have heard a lot, and if the economy stays good and with a low unemployment rate, the lowest in 50 years, Trump says, in our history, he's going to cruise to victory. Now, I actually saw an interview with somebody from a very distinguished think tank, and he said what can beat the economy for the Democrats is turnout. Turnout. The black Americans didn't turn out for Hillary. They didn't like her. I always say to myself, are they happy now? People in Philadelphia, people in Pittsburgh, okay, people in Detroit, people in Milwaukee, black people, African Americans, did not turn out for Hillary in the numbers that she needed to win that election. And now it's a big if. I know that they didn't like Hillary, and the question is, what's going to happen now? Are we going to get African American turnout? Are we going to get turnout? Because I can tell you, you heard it from me first. If the turnout is high, and in the midterm elections we had 50% turnout, which is enormous for America. Sweden has 82% turnout. We're lucky we don't even break 50. And I think what the Democrats have to say to their supporters, they have to say, look, Trump supporters, they will swim rivers. They will swim oceans. They will do anything to vote. You saw the election day pictures. They were online. They were online for hours. they will kill to vote for this guy. And if the Democrats don't come out in the same numbers or more, they will not win the election. So let me conclude by saying what the percentages are. The Economist gives Trump 49% chance to win the election. I give him a 40% chance because I think there will be a high turnout. And the question is, who's the candidate going to be? As long as the party doesn't veer too much to the left and become socialist, they've got to appeal to the moderates, and whoever that is has to veer toward the center. Then they have a very, very decent chance if they get a good turnout. If the turnout is sluggish, then Trump could, and the economy stays the way it is, Trump could very well win re-election. I am optimistic that the Democrats will not, as we always say, seize defeat from the jaws of victory. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Wenig. Let me ask you a personal question, please, if you may. First, you've seen so many countries and you come from Alaska. Why did you decide to live in Vienna?
When people ask me that question, you know what I say? I say, I don't like to drive. And I especially don't like to drive in Vienna. My middle finger really hurts when I drive in Vienna, I have to say. It's getting very sore. I never engaged in road rage until I came to Vienna, I have to say. But I don't like to drive. And Vienna has the best public transport system I have ever seen in the world, even better than Germany, which is going a long way. And so I find driving dehumanizing. And in America, the only place you can do that is in Manhattan. And I don't really like living in Manhattan. So I like the fact that Vienna has urban quality of life, and I can take the U-Bahn everywhere, and I don't have to worry about driving. Although I do drive, I try not to drive. I get very crazy when I drive in Vienna, but I like the fact that public transport is good. And that, to me, was the motivating factor in coming to Vienna.
Good to know. When we talk about, we heard about the future, let's just talk about the last couple of years first and start with Trump. His election was a surprise. Do you think that the reaction has been overdone? Is there actually lots of evidence to say that his actions have actually damaged globalization and world trade as much as we think it has?
Well, I was just looking up the final numbers when you asked this question, because there was today or yesterday the new United Nations report on investments and so on came out, and they said that foreign direct investment is now minus 13% compared to last year, and it's the third year consecutive year in decline. So, of course, obviously, this is not only with regards to Trump. This has all kinds of other reasons as well. But fact is, foreign direct investment is down for 3 years.
So,
yes, globally.
Mr. Wenig, you talked about your uncle, and he got this low taxes and he cares about the stock market, right? But Trump is playing with the stock market. The stock market reacts to his every tweet every day, and the policies that he's implementing are not very positive on the surface for the economy. But and then you say the economy is the main issue. So what do you think is happening here?
Well, the economy, the unemployment rate is low. I just want to get back to your last question, though. I don't believe that everybody makes a big deal that Brexit and Trump is somehow linked. I'm not convinced that what's happening in Europe is somehow linked to us in a direct way. I think a lot of these countries have problems with immigration, with terrorism, with economic issues. I think that it's very, very different. And by the way, I was reading a very interesting article about referendum or referenda. You know, where the Brits made a mistake, you don't have a referendum without a minimum, without a minimum shelf. The way Brexit should have happened is they should have had a 60%, at least a 60% threshold that you had to meet, either side. 51 to 49, give me a break. The 49% of the people are going to be very angry, and that's exactly what has happened. So let's leave Brexit out of the equation, in my opinion, and we have to look at the fact that Trump just squeaked by by using the Electoral College. And by the way, his people are already predicting that he will not win the popular vote in 2020. That his only way to win is via the Electoral College again. And that means he has to win those 4 states.
Yeah, but that is always true, right? I mean, it's not his fault that
No,
that's the way it works.
most cases the popular vote follows Electoral College. It was only in Al Gore's case, and 100 years before that, we've only had 3 or 4 instances, I think 3 instances, where the popular vote went against the Electoral College. Most of the time, they go together.
When you look at what's happening within the states, do people actually care about tariffs against China, or about the implications of that? Or do they just see Trump as defending them against some enemy?
Well, I think the jury's still out on whether the tariffs are going to work, because if the Chinese give Trump a win, then he's going to use that and say, look, because a lot of people feel that what he's doing with the Chinese is good. If he had brought the allies along and gotten the intellectual property and all the other things that the Chinese are doing to keep their market protected, I think all that is positive. But the way he's gone about it to make them lose face is bad. Now, the average American consumer, when they start going to Walmart and these shops and start seeing their prices go up, that might affect the economy. Will affect the economy. I don't know if you'd like to add it to the
Although I might kick in here that I've showed you the maps beforehand for Austria. If we would look at these maps and we would look at this from the perspective of the U.S., then this is even more concentrated. So the U.S. is even much more U.S.-oriented, and foreign countries all around doesn't matter much less than even our neighboring countries here in Austria. So the ultimate effect, I think, for the local U.S. population is relatively limited. That will be my idea.
Does the U.S. economy even need the rest of the world?
To a large extent, no.
So it is less globalized because it's a very big country that could be self-sustaining.
It's a very inward-looking country from a trade and investment perspective.
The prices are going to go up, and we're going to see also what's going to happen with the farmers, with soybeans and all the, he's trying to give aid now to the farmers, but that the Chinese have targeted tariffs to the states that produce products that those states supported Trump. They're not stupid. They know where to go, and and I think that could have an effect on consumer prices and on farm prices, which it already has. So
yes, I think the strategies of the Chinese government, but also of the Europeans, the EU, the same thing, is they have fired back with tariffs, which were very strongly targeted towards very specific areas. So very clearly only, for example, motorbikes against Harley-Davidson exports, or peanuts or something like this. In a very detailed way. And China and the EU are relatively similar in this regard. And this could have an impact in these specific areas.
Do you think that Europe is actually following China in this regard?
Not following, but obviously Trump has used the tariffs in a very much let's say in a very strong, very aggressive, and very often in an unreasoned way, right? The only reasoning is that somehow it's better for the U.S. with these tariffs, and at the same time, I would say so. This has meant that the Europeans said, okay, that's not the way how we want to do it. We want to follow the World Trade Organization rules, and I would also like to say, partially, some of the criticism that comes from the U.S. against the Chinese government, for example, regarding state capitalism and forced tech transfer and stuff like this, the Europeans are sharing this to some extent. So I wouldn't say that the Europeans are on the side of the Chinese. They're also not on the side of Trump. They're somewhere in between. Yeah.
We've mentioned Brexit. What's the effect of Brexit on globalization? Or the fear of Brexit, because Trump has happened, Brexit hasn't.
True. It's not clear yet, I would say. Right. For the moment, the only thing that we say is that a bit less investments because no one knows what will happen, and it all depends on what will be the final result. If it will be a hard Brexit or a soft one.
I think it's going to be a hard Brexit because if Boris Johnson becomes prime minister, I think the Europeans aren't going to cut him any breaks because they want to send a clear message that leaving the EU has costs. And if there is a hard Brexit, I can tell you the UK is going to suffer economically. That's my view, which is not a crazy view. Many people feel that way.
Do you, as a seasoned diplomat, do you see, you know, the world stage being harsher today than it has been 20 years ago, or is that just?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I worked in public diplomacy, and what we were about was values. I didn't mention values in my talk, by the way, but that's what America has to offer the world is values. And I would not want to be an American diplomat right now in the public diplomacy area to talk about values, because I'll give you an example. When I was in Cairo, I met the Hungarian ambassador. This was before Trump got elected. And I told him I didn't like Orban. I don't like Orban, okay? And after that, he wouldn't speak to me. I ran into him in receptions. He'd avoid me. And then Trump got elected. What can I say to this guy now? What can I possibly say to him?
Did he come and tell you that he loves Trump?
I know he would love Trump, because he told me during the crisis with the immigrants at the South Station in Budapest, he told me that they're all terrorists. That's what he told me. This is the Hungarian ambassador to Egypt. And he said they're all. This is when the Hungarians were denying water to these poor people at the South Station during the heat wave and everything else. I hope there are no Hungarians in the room. If they are, they probably agree with me. But the point is, maybe they don't. The point is that you know, same thing in Poland. Look what happened in Poland. When I was in Poland, we had a friendly government. Now we don't. So well, they're friendly to Trump, but they're not. In my opinion, they're not friendly to democracy.
So are we seeing? Are we by concentrating on Trump and Brexit, are we maybe not seeing like the small parts of the whole picture? Is that possible? Like Poland, Hungary, what is happening there?
From my perspective, I think what is more important is not individual countries. Also, because on the level of the entire globe, they're probably all of them individually not that relevant, and things might change again. What is a bit more important are these underlying drivers of some of the trade wars, which is not only political on the US side, but it's these things that I already just talked about. So, for example, you know, state capitalism in China and the forced technology transfer when there's joint projects or joint ventures, which has really upset European and US investors in China. You can see some of this is picked up by the Trump government, probably in a much more aggressive way, and in a way which is not well communicated. But some of these underlying threats are very well shared also among essentially all European countries. And these are important drivers for why there are tariffs and why there's some pushback.
But that's our problem with China. But do you believe that Trump will, you know, maybe if he gets re-elected, will he turn to Europe? Will it be a trade war with Europe?
Well, there already is.
Well, there already is. So
he's threatening tariffs.
He's threatening tariffs. Okay, so we are already in the trade war. Are we agreed with this? Are we already?
I would say not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
But with China, yes or no?
Yes. Not yet. Even with China, because you know. The tariffs haven't really begun to bite yet, because the goods in transit weren't affected. Now we're getting the rubber's meeting the road now, and we're going to start seeing the results of what's going to happen. Now, President Xi is going to meet Trump at the G20. And Trump, by the way, threatened to increase the tariffs even more if Xi didn't meet with him. So apparently Trump was afraid that Xi wasn't going to meet with him. He was going to spurn him. But now Xi has agreed to meet with Trump. So we'll see what happens out of that. But I would say we're heading toward a trade war. I don't know, Professor Nell may have another view, but I think we're heading toward it, but we're not there yet. That would be my view.
I think we're already in there, simply because if you look at the facts, I mean, there's US tariffs against China already, plus threats to further increase it. There's tariffs against Turkey because they're not happy with the Turks neither. There's tariffs against the EU or threats against the EU regarding increasing tariffs, and there's also the same thing with regards to Mexico that you also alluded to. So in my mind, we are already fully in there, and so lots of different countries are already involved.
He threatened tariffs in Mexico, and of course, the North Korea. There's a lot of sanctions that are going on, but the tariffs were just threatened for Mexico, I think. But he uses this as a weapon to kind of. It's a negotiating tactic, people say, that he throws it out there to get everybody shook up, and then he'll back off, you know.
But in the end, tariffs are also hitting the states, right?
Well, Trump says that he tries to make it sound like the other countries are paying the tariffs, but it's the American consumer that's paying the tariffs, of course, because in higher prices the prices will go up.
So this is, for me, it's the first that we have 3 non-economists on stage at the Wirtschaftsuniversität, so that's nice. But what do you think does he have a long-term plan with regards to the economy? Does he know where to go from he probably thinks he will win the trade wars, right? So what happens afterwards?
Well, that's a tough question.
Because you said that the economy is the main issue for voters, right? So he couldn't be screwing with the economy too much, right?
Well, I didn't mention this in my talk, and I actually had it in my notes. I don't think a president is really responsible for buoying the economy up. I think a president can destroy the economy or can have a negative effect on the economy. And if you remember, Obama took over in 2008. We were heading toward a depression. Obama single-handedly saved the U.S. auto industry when the Republicans wanted to let it go. And people have a short memory. So how much effect does a president really have on the economy? The economy, to me, I don't know, it's like a big ship. And, it takes a long time to turn that ship. You start to turn the ship, and you can't just do like that. It takes a long time. Mm-hmm. And everything goes in cycles. And I think Trump got on the right cycle with the fact that things had already started to turn around with Obama, and then things really took off in terms of unemployment going low and this kind of thing. But a lot of people have not been positively affected by the U.S. economy, by the success of the U.S. economy. Wages have stagnated to some degree. There are people who can't find jobs in certain areas. But I think overall, the economy, people are better off. A lot of people feel they're better off than they were. And it's only a slim majority, but that's all it takes to get those states to vote for Trump for re-election. So that's what the Democrats are concerned about. But in terms of your question about where things are going to happen with China, I don't think anybody really knows. I personally think the Chinese are going to hang on and just see if they can hold Trump at bay until the next election. Now, if he wins re-election, that changes the whole dynamic. Then they're going to have to figure something out. But I still feel that he has made them lose face. They were having negotiations with the Chinese, and the Chinese basically walked out. And I think that he was giving them ultimatums. And he didn't have the Europeans on his side. He was basically doing it alone. And I think that's what affected the outcome of those negotiations. I don't know. That's my view.
Mm-hmm. Professor Nell, one thing I do want to know is, does this mean that as a Europeans and as Chinese, do we have to turn inwards? Do we have to look at our own markets and what we can do there? Do we have to be more like the Americans and being self-sustainable, or is that not?
I don't know. Again, I'm not an economist, but what I can say is, of course, that if you look at firm activity right now, it's concentrated on Europe, on the Eurozone.
So that's already happening.
And yeah. It's already, you've seen the maps, right? Mm-hmm. This is how it looks. So if in the very edges of the maps there's certain things happening, maybe that's not that important. On the contrary, Europe will become slightly more important.
Do you think
the direct neighbors?
When we look at Eastern Europe, do we see them joining the Eurozone quicker or slower?
I have no idea.
Because I'm getting emails from Bulgaria that they don't want to join the euro now.
It depends on the deficit situation, and they've got to get the fiscal side of the equation organized. I think that's why you see the Czechs also hesitate, whereas the Slovaks are already in the Eurozone. I think, and I know when I was in Poland, they're still big on the zloty. They don't want to jump in. I think the Eurozone, and there's a lot of uncertainty also what's going to happen in Germany with Merkel's successor. There's so many open questions. Mm-hmm. I think that's my view anyway. But I think ultimately these countries in Eastern Europe are going to have to join the Eurozone.
I do want to open for questions after one more question from my side. So please prepare yourselves and please don't be afraid to ask the first question. Mr. Wenig, one more question with regards to the election next year and issues. You talked about the Democrats. So everybody talks about Trump. You talked about the Democrats. So Trump is owning the issue of economy and he's owning the issue of immigration. What issue is there that the Democrats can, even if they have the perfect candidate, what issue can they run on?
Well, I wouldn't give Trump totally the issue of immigration, although the Democrats seem to have handed it to him. I don't know if anybody's following the news, but now he's threatening to deport illegal aliens, so it'll be like the midnight knock on the door, and, you know, get your stuff together and out you go. And, you know, that happened in Vienna in, 1938 or something, right? So we don't want to see that happen. We don't want to see that happen in the United States. If that does happen, he's threatening to do it. A lot of people don't feel he'll do it. But so, and the question of families at the border and all this kind of thing. So immigration is still dividing the country, and I wouldn't give it to him. The economy, yes. I mean, again, the turnout can somehow affect that, because a lot of people aren't happy with Trump. You know, a normal president with 3% unemployment, he'd be cruising to a landslide right now. We wouldn't even be talking about this. It would be a no-brainer that he was going to win. And yet it's fairly close. So I would say that the Democrats' issue, the Democrats are going to run on health care. Is a big one. The Republicans are totally bankrupt on health care. They have no idea. The education issue, I also think, is very big. And I think, also the affordability issue, getting a living wage, minimum wage for people. In Australia, the minimum wage is $25 an hour. You go and get somebody in your house, any kind of service thing, forget it. I mean, it even dwarfs Austria, which is incredible too, to get any service person in your house, a plumber, electrician. In Australia, I mean, $25 an hour minimum wage. In the States, it's $12 an hour. People aren't making any money. And so, but these people have to vote. That's the whole issue. And I think, again, it all comes down for the Democrats for voting. Those people who stayed home in 2016, who didn't vote, they voted for Trump, basically. If you didn't vote, you stayed home, you voted for Trump. That's basically the bottom line. So the Democrats are, and they're not. They can't just pick on Trump. They can't just do that. They got to stand for something. Hillary just picked on Trump. She couldn't believe that people would vote for this guy, right? Just like Al Gore couldn't believe people would vote for George Bush either. You got to stand for something, and that's what they have to. The healthcare thing is very big.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. We have two colleagues with microphones, and would ask you kindly, somebody needs to be the first one. Please, over there. We're also recording, so it's a classic microphone issue. It comes right after the PowerPoint issue.
Yeah. Thanks for the speeches. My name is Simon Groß. I'm from Vienna. I have a question to you. First of all, I'm very fascinated by the insights. You seem to be politically centrist, not left-wing, not right-wing. And since you have been a diplomat for years, I was wondering if you are aware of any platform, any centrist platform, which would enable centrists from Austria, from Europe, but also from the USA to cooperate a little bit more in order to help the world become more centrist again.
I don't know of any international cooperation for centrists. It seems like the right has cornered the market on this international cooperation, doesn't it? But certainly, I think the Democrats now, the centrists anyway, we're focused mainly on the U.S. right now. I think the feeling is that a lot is riding on this next election. If Donald Trump wins re-election, the United States is going to be profoundly changed. And I think that right now we're not worried. Austria has its own issues. I think they're different issues. And by the way, I have to tell you, I forgot to throw this in. When we talk about the economy, who's the person in the 20th century that got the economy the strongest, right? It's Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler made Germany great again. He put Germany back to work. So if we only look at the economy, we have to look beyond that. That's what I tell people. We have to look beyond the economy. We have to look at what people stand for. We have to look at values. And I think we have lost our values. And the question is, are we going to find our values again? And I say we, I'm talking about a majority of people. So I think if the Democrats can take the White House again in 2020, I think that would be the time that maybe they would reach out to other countries and try to create a centrist agenda. But I'm not convinced that all these countries, that the whole world is going anti-global. Okay, there are individual reasons, but I'm not sure that the Brexit vote, put Trump in the White House. Some people feel the Brexit vote put Trump in the White House. Oh, come on. The Brexit vote was very close. Trump's vote was very close. I'm not convinced.
Thank you very much. Do we have another question? Really not? Yes, thank you.
Hi. Do you think America is ready for Kamala Harris if she would ever win?
She's a brilliant woman. She was having problems early on with answering questions. She said, "I'll study that," or "I'll look into that." And she's new to the national stage, and I think that she needs to get a little bit more hardening, a little more experience. The speaker last night was saying that when she gets the first or second question, she's off and running, but when you get to that third and fourth question, she starts to go down. I mean, I've always said I'm uneasy with a woman candidate because of the misogyny that exists in my country. I have ill at ease with a black candidate. I have ill at ease with a gay candidate. If you're going to beat Donald Trump, you need every point you can get. And the fact of the matter is, a woman candidate is going to face an uphill battle right out of the gate. A black candidate is going to face an uphill battle out of the gate. A black woman candidate, it's going to be steeper, right? If she were gay, then it would even be steeper, right? And so these are tough things, and yet are we going to have a white male candidate? Kamala Harris. I don't know if you all know this, but she's so intelligent and she's so funny. So somebody asked her recently, would you be vice president for Joe Biden? And she turned it around and she said, well, Joe Biden, he'd make a great vice president for me. Yeah, he's done the job. He knows the job. He'd be perfect. What a great answer. So, no, I like Kamala Harris, and we'll have to see how she does. Her numbers are decent now, and we'll have to see. She's a brilliant woman, and we'll have to see what happens.
Excellent.
Greetings. Relating to what you just said, do you think that the best winning ticket can be Joe Biden, Kamala Harris? Because I think it's a great balance between having a white male candidate that can win possibly Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin possibly with Kamala Harris, they can attack Georgia, even Texas with the latest result. And my second question is, what happened to GOP? Republican Party used to stand for low tariffs, no tariffs at all, free trade, a strong U.S. foreign policy, and everything that just gone by the window. Thank you.
Well, I'll get to your second question first. That's, the Republican Party is a party of Trump, and the people who left, they just left. They're out there in the Netherlands. Okay, so the party has changed, has transitioned, and I think the reason that so many Republicans support him is he's won the election. He's got the power. And I'm not sure about your first question. Are you asking if a minority can run against him, or who can be strongest against him? Okay, well, I think whoever gets the nomination, you're going to see a balanced ticket. You might see male, female, white, black. You're going to see a balance, okay? But who can beat Trump best, we don't know yet. It's too soon. And Trump is, by the way, he's worried. He's very scared of Biden. And by the way, he is going to live tweet the debate next week. Can you believe this? He's going to live tweet. So he's going to be on Air Force One going to China, or Japan, and he's going to live tweet, what people say. This is incredible. That's good for the Democrats, because it gives more attention to the whole thing. But you're going to see a balance. I personally think Kamala Harris or Pete Buttigieg might be somebody's vice president. But we'll see. We'll see. It's too soon. It's a year and a half down the road. It's way, way too soon. Don't believe all these polls. It's just pie in the sky stuff.
We have 2 more questions and 3 more questions, please. Der Herr in der dritten Reihe.
My name is Paul Louis. I'm a retired political scientist, and I'm quite interested in American politics. The problem here in Austria or in Europe is that we only get the information about the US from Associated Press and CNN International. But this is not a fair reporting about the US. I mean, I listen, if I can, Fox and Friends at 12 o'clock noon here in Austria, which is difficult because you get it only streaming. Fox News you cannot watch in Austria. And then Rush Limbaugh at 6 o'clock in the evening for dinner, which gives another view of the United States politics. So I'm a bit surprised that we hear here again what we hear all the time and read all the time in the European papers and television, this Trump bashing, even here in Austria, the Nazi bludgeon, etc., which we here in Austria are quite familiar with, and things like that. I mean, there are quite a lot of other things to talk about President Trump. Why he uses this tariffs? Well, this is the only thing he can now use because the Congress is split, so he has to use things which he can use as president, and so he uses these tariffs. Not, I think not only the tariffs, but the security issue with Hawaii and the mobile phones, etc. And I think the Chinese are now a little bit more forthcoming because this one big company is drastically losing revenues, and so I'm not sure if they can really wait until the election for another president. Okay, this is my small commentary, and my question is now, identity politics. The Democrats, I think, lost the last election because of identity politics. I mean, Hillary Clinton, these are the deplorables, the white, male, uneducated persons, the workers, the plumbers, etc. And this is completely crazy for a party to say, we don't need the white, uneducated people. These are the deplorables. We are the clever ones, and we are the educated, and we are the college people, etc. And until now, I don't see any change among the Democratic candidates, and therefore probably Trump has quite a good chance to win again. And last evening's talk by Mr. Frank Luntz was quite interesting. I mean, he showed how divided the United States is, and I don't see any candidate from the Democratic side who is able, maybe Biden, but he has other skeletons in his, so I'm not sure about that. But identity politics, this is one of the crazy things of the Democrats. How can they overcome this identity politics?
Well, I'm glad that somebody was at Luntz's show, I call it a show last night, because I disagreed with 3/4 of what Luntz said last night, I have to tell you. Especially when he talked about how school shootings are infinitesimal. The fact that school shooting, remember he said school shootings, he said in Austria you're getting news about school shootings that, like they happen every day. Well, it seems like they do happen every day. And he tried to minimize the importance of this, and I took extreme opposition to that. Well, the problem is what you're getting in Austria, you don't get the full, even the political picture. But I take your point about identity politics, and I take your point about what Hillary said. Absolutely, you can't criticize your voters. Absolutely, he was right about that. And I think that the Democrats, I think they realize what they have to do to overcome the Democratic Party. You know, my dad was a Democrat because he was a working person, and they were union people. And the Democrats need to get back to those guys. And that's where Joe Biden, I think, can connect, because he's a working guy himself. But what I don't understand, though, is, again, these working people, they turn to Trump. But you know when President Obama used to say about Donald Trump? He said he's a cartoon character. He said that. But he also said that the only working person that Donald Trump ever came in contact with is the person that cleans his room. Okay, this is not a person who has a lot of contact with working people, okay? Who did? Trump. He had contact where with working people? I have to respectfully disagree. Firstly, on a lot of those jobs, he employed illegal aliens. Let's not forget that. But on top of that, he was dealing at the upper level. He very rarely came in contact with the... He met a need, okay? He was the right man at the right time in the right point in history to meet a need, and he did. And I take your point. And I think the Democrats were elitist. They became elitist. All that is right. I get all that. But what I don't get is how he's going to help them. I don't get that. And he hasn't. And that's what I don't get.
I'm going...
Yeah, but again, you know, if you're watching Fox News or Rush Limbaugh, you're not getting the whole story. Oh, no, you have to. I have trouble watching Fox News. I used to be able to watch it for 5 minutes. I can't watch it for 5 minutes anymore because it's very skewed.
Where there's in the US?
I don't agree. I don't agree.
Luckily, in American television, you never have to watch anything for 5 minutes because after 4 minutes, it's
too many
a commercial
commercials.
break. Yes. Professor Nell, I want to ask you because we're talking about Trump not in a very, let's say, nice way, which is fine. But I want to ask you, is there, from the perspective of a corporation, of an international corporation, maybe an American one, is there anything that he's doing that's actually positive?
Well, of course, there's always a counter side, right? So in the moment that he's blocking competition to come into the US with tariffs, right, the local US firm will profit from that. Right? So for example, I remember during the times of the election campaign, I think, there was, if you look at sports goods producers, I think New Balance, the brand, is one of the few brands that is actually manufacturing a lot in the US, and they therefore also came out strongly as supporting Trump because they thought, whatever will happen with him, perhaps we will profit from this because we're not so internationalized in terms of the value chain as Nike or some other producers.
And when you look at the renegotiation of rules between the big blocs, US, EU, and China, this is something that might benefit corporations in the long run. Is that possible?
How, in what way?
Well, maybe if the Chinese are subsidizing their companies, we've got Austrian companies complaining about that. If that changes, is that not something that you want to see?
I mean, the best of all outcomes would be that Trump, with all his weird, aggressive moves that might be perceived like that, achieves a situation that the Chinese government plays a bit more by the rules than before, and all the other maybe negative aspects of his policies disappear. Well, then of course we would have a great outcome long term. I personally am not so sure that this is the outcome that he's aiming for, really, but it could happen.
Okay, well, we'll see.
And I think, in answer to your question, I think he's on the right track with the Chinese. I think his demands are correct. This was pointed out by Luntz last night. This is correct, and he can have a huge win if they were to fold, and if they were. But he's asking them to change their whole point of view, and again, he's asking in a very bullish, kind of a bullying way. And I think that you can't bully. East Asians, they're gonna lose face. I'm telling you. I was a year in Cambodia. I know about losing face, and I've read extensively about China, and you can't bully your way through China. It isn't going to work.
I want to ask you because we saw the map of the globalization for Austria, for example. So we saw which countries are important in a market financial sense, and we just talked about the question, how well are we informed here in Austria about what's happening in the US? I personally think, relative to everything else we know about, we know a whole lot about what's happening in the US. Would you not agree? Is that, I mean, of course it could always be more, but the amount of stuff we know, I mean, I can follow Trump live tweeting the Democratic debate if I want to.
Yeah, I think people are relatively well informed, especially a group like this. People are educated. I think they know what's going on. Hopefully they do. Hopefully I'm not speaking about something that's totally alien to people. But I think that people are fairly well informed here, and I'm not trying to say that people aren't. I just am hopefully filling in the spaces a little bit, and I feel that I tried to present an analysis tonight of the Trump voters because I feel that I'm not doing it in a denigrating way. I'm not calling these people deplorables. I just can't figure it out. That's my issue. I would never denigrate somebody. I think everybody has a right to their own political opinions. But I think that Austrians, for me, from my point of view, I think they're relatively well informed.
We have one or two more questions that I've seen, please. Yes, or three, excellent. Four, then we are.
Hello, my question is, will Trump lead America to economic isolation? And if it's so, then how it will affect the influence of America on Middle East or especially EMEA region? Thank you.
Do you want to get that one?
No.
I don't think America can be economically isolated. That's going to be pretty hard to do. Now, I don't know what relation that has to the Middle East. What's the Middle East angle there?
He's increasing tariffs, and in the meantime, China is putting his all hands and all the money in this area. And you know, if you have seen in the recent times, there are change of friendships, and people who tend to look towards America are now looking towards China. So, for example, I'm from Pakistan. So in this area with Pakistan, India, Afghanistan, these small countries who are progressing, now they're more tilted towards China rather than America.
Well, I think maybe that could be somewhat temporary. I think we'll see what happens now in the future. I think that's where the re-election of Trump is critical, because I think we need to do more with our allies, especially in the Middle East. If you look at, we seem to get closer to Saudi Arabia than we are to some of our traditional allies, and I think in Europe and even in Asia. So we'll have to see what happens with that. But I'm personally not too concerned. And by the way, we didn't even talk about North Korea. I was surprised nobody asked about North Korea. Of course, Trump has having a love affair with Kim Jong-un, but nobody knows what's really going to happen. I personally feel that North Korea will not denuclearize, and you have to recognize them as a nuclear state and put them on notice that if they make a false move, they'll be annihilated. That's the only thing. And of course, they became a nuclear power with the help of Pakistan, I have to say. So, but we'll see what's going to happen with that. He wants a win in North Korea, but I think right now nobody knows. North Korea has given us an ultimatum that they want to see some movement by the end of the year, or else. So we'll have to see what's going to happen with that.
Thank you very much. I've seen 2 or 3 more questions. There was one on this right where you stand, and then we will just work our way over there and then finish up.
I'll go first.
So I, as a person who's black, and I was an immigrant, turned American citizen, now turned diplomat, how do you reconcile centralism with people with, I view centralism as someone who's much more central. I view it as a privilege. How do you reconcile centralism and people who are not as privileged to be centralist? Because some of the issues, like people who are poor or people who are immigrants, it's kind of hard for you to say like, oh, well, let me ignore certain issues for myself so that I could vote much more in the middle and vote for a candidate who's much more in the middle rather than voting for a candidate who maybe supports immigrants, maybe supports people who are black or underprivileged. How do you reconcile centralism and privilege?
How do you define centralism?
Like for people, how I define it is like I personally voted for Bernie, and that was my first election that I voted in. Mm-hmm. And of course, after that, I did vote for Hillary. And I viewed, why did I vote for Hillary? Because I saw Hillary much more centralist. In her view, she was not for universal health care or education for all. So I know these ideas that some people look at as much more extreme and ideas that are not achievable in a much more American setting. So I'm trying to figure out how does someone who comes from a family of immigrants and would like to have not had student loans, and how do you reconcile for someone who's poor to say like, I would like to go to school and have school be paid for, even at least at a community college level, and for candidates who are like, well, maybe we just do a little bit. I'm just trying to figure out how do you reconcile those aspects.
Well, that's very difficult to say. I think that there are a lot of people that feel that healthcare should be for all, or that education should be for all. But I think Americans would get nervous about that. How are you going to pay for that? People don't seem to like taxes. You know, in Alaska, we have a huge government deficit because people don't want to pay taxes. If you don't pay taxes, you can't have government. And I think that, you know, Austria, I mean, oh my God, I tell people the Mehrwertsteuer is 20%. In America, people can't believe it. He said, 20%, how do you pay that?
Well, we're the opposite. We love taxes and free healthcare.
Yeah. And I said, not only that, you have to pay the guys parking, and you have to pay the guys transport, and everything else. They can't believe it. They just are amazed. So you're within those confines, you know, and I think it's very, very difficult. Personally, I would like to see us move more to the left. I think we're moving in that direction. I think Bernie may be ahead of his time, actually, in some ways. I think, and I think he really got cheated last time. I really do. And I'm glad to hear that you supported him, because he really did get the short end of the stick by the Democratic National Committee. It was Hillary's time. And Hillary, by the way, has lost 2 elections. She lost to Trump and she lost to Obama in 2008. She would have been, in my opinion, a good president, but she's a lousy candidate. She has very bad advisors. She had the same advisors. She has all kinds of issues, Hillary does. And so I think that, but I do think that Bernie would scare people, especially people who, when you're having a close election like that, you're only, you know, you're at the 51-49, and you throw in democratic socialism and you try to define it, it makes people worried. So I think being a moderate or left center is where you might have a shot in the U.S. But I think Bernie's right, and to get those people out to vote, that's the tricky part too. And voter exclusion among people of color, especially in the southern states, also a problem. And you know about this. I mean, with what happened in Georgia and everything else, it's very difficult. I hope that answers.
Yeah, that answers the question, but it's kind of hard to, of course, before this I did live in South Carolina, and I did go out and vote in a place where 89% voted for Trump. And I did go out and vote and voted for Hillary and still voted for Bernie, but it's kind of hard to reconcile finding a candidate who also supports things that I believe in, things that I cannot change about myself.
Isn't it amazing in South Carolina? You know, in the South, you can't be a Democrat. So you've got a Republican senator who's black, Tim Scott. He had to be a Republican. Or you have Mia Love in Utah, who's the daughter of Haitian immigrants. She had to be a Republican. And remember Donald Trump? He said, "Mia Love, you gave me no love." Remember that? And I don't know what she did to him, but you can't be a Democrat. And the Democrats have given up whole swaths of the country. You have to be. And in Alaska, you have to be independent. It's almost a dirty word to be a Democrat. I told a woman at church when I went to Alaska this time, we were talking politics, and I said, "I'm a tax and spend liberal," I said. And my friend said, "Whoa, boy, you really shocked her. You don't meet many people like you."
Well, we are almost out of time, but I do want to give a chance to ask the gentleman already has the microphone, so I can't take it away from him.
My question is, do you think that climate change policies will have a big impact on the election in the US? And what do you think are the most important aspects to get people vote for you?
Well, from what I've read, climate change does not rank very highly in voter preferences. And I don't think it's as high as health care and some of the other things. But I think that a Democratic administration would put us back into the Paris Agreement. And, you know, we're not the only country, you know, that has issues with climate change. Australia just had an election, and they put back the government that's basically against, you know, carbon emissions and limitations and so forth. So we never should have withdrawn from Paris, in my view. But I don't think that's a top issue for most Americans, unfortunately. But I think it's very, very important, obviously.
What will be the most important aspects to get people?
Well, renewable energy, getting people off coal. Remember Trump said he wanted to restore coal jobs? That's crazy talk. I mean, you know, we've got to move to solar. We've got to move to wind energy. We've got to move to renewables. And it's very difficult to do that when you have a president that wants to stay with traditional energy, you know, with fossil fuels and this kind of thing. It's very difficult.
I've seen one more question in the front, please, and then I'm afraid we have to wrap it up. I'm sure that the speakers will still be here for a little chat afterwards.
Thank you. And I just wanted firstly to say that I disagree with your statement about the Nazi economy, because I think they fundamentally did not get how the economy works. But back to my question, because you said kind of like, you know, that their economy was the greatest, and kind of like, but that's a whole different topic. But my question is, like, are the United States stronger than ever before? Because the dominance of the US military, the strength of the financial markets, these dominant US companies, like, will the US still be the biggest player in the 22nd century or 21st century? We're not right there yet.
Might be yours. No?
No.
No?
I'm
Still
not a political scientist or...
well, he's talking about economics.
Yeah, but you know, you were talking about power, right? In terms
Yeah,
of military and so
like
on.
power, because like the 21st, like analysts have always predicted that there will be China's rise and Asia's rise to the top, but I feel like the US is stronger than they were ever before, and that they will still kind of like continue on this path to become even more like dominant.
Well, that's why this election coming up is so important, because I think our soft power has been reduced. I don't think we have the soft power that we had. Soft power meaning leadership in international organizations, leadership in an international system that we helped create, okay? Hard power, yes, our military is still the strongest. Trump's putting a lot of money into the military and so forth. So hard power, yes. Economic power, yes, if we don't turn too much inward. But soft power, again, I get back to values again. I think we have suffered with values. We support dictatorships. We're not into human rights anymore. We're not into the things that I used to be involved in. And this is troubling. And if Trump wins re-election, I think we're going to stay on that path, unfortunately. But the country is so divided politically, as I said before, really is divided. And people can't talk to each other anymore. This is what Luntz said last night. People don't talk to each other. And by the way, the only thing Luntz left out was, why do people support a braggart? You know, why do people support somebody that brags that they're the best and the greatest? This is what I didn't understand. But again, I don't feel that people who support Trump are deplorables. But I wonder why they would support somebody who says they're the greatest when they're not Muhammad Ali. This is what I don't get. So soft power, values, we're suffering, in my opinion, in that area.
Thank you very much. I think that concludes it. We're already 10 minutes over time. Thank you so much to our panelists and our speakers today. A warm round of applause for Professor Nell and Mark Wennick, please. And have a very nice evening, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.